be seated. I'm not sure who the pericope pickers were. I didn't ask that, Craig. I just celebrated that you picked out the most perfect lessons for today. And you picked them out in such a way that the lectionary doesn't usually do, that it taught me some things I'm quite excited about. Well, as Craig said, a blessed new year to you. We're at a time of transition. And in the church, at times of transition, we look back. Where have we been? And then we look forward. Where is God leading us? But we're in that in-between right now, that wonderful space where things are still moldable and shapeable. There's a time, there is a season for every matter under heaven. And this is a time to look back and to look forward. I skip down to our second lesson. See, I am making all things new. Happy New Year, but Happy New You. These lessons just come together in fantastic ways. One of the things, Craig, that this taught me by putting these together is that Maslow, the guy that made this pyramid, and he said, you know, the most critical human needs are food and drink and shelter. And, you know, that's what we start with. We look at the end of the second lesson. Well, actually, back to Ecclesiastes. It's God's gift that all should eat and drink and take pleasure. Maslow's highest need for human beings. And we look at the second lesson. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift, the springs of water of life. We need these things. And as we go into the sheep and the goats, Jesus says, I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I needed shelter, and you provided shelter. Maslow said, before anybody preaches to you, you got to take care of those things. And then, once they know that their needs will be met for survival, then come other things. Last night, I got to see and walk through and talk to some of the folks in your SEMP, your Saturday evening meal, and what's the P? Program. 30 years long. I heard how it started. I think it's absolutely delightful. And I talked to you guys. I'm a country mouse, but you city mice, you're doing a good job. And I saw those people. And not only was it 5 below outside, but these people were fed, and then there was a bus to take them to warm shelter. I recognized real quickly just the 2 minutes it takes me to get to my car. My fingers were numb, my lungs were hurting, and I couldn't imagine spending a whole night trying to figure out how I was going to survive. You guys get it. And I thank you. Second needs, emotional hurt and harm. And I understand you have Stephen's ministers. And I hope and pray that each of you are involved. Last night I asked Craig, and he took me to a lady. I said, you know, I've been doing this in Washington State with my church, and we would have people from the congregation that would sit with those folks. Because sometimes there was a lot of elderly, and a lot of times the elderly had enough food, but they always ate it alone. And to come here, they could be with people and with children. There were single-parent mothers down there, and they could be fed as family, and it was so beautiful to see. And that's so critically important. But after the food, and after the drink and the clothing and the shelter, Jesus then says, then people need to be part of a family. They need to be part of a community. They need to belong. And without that, we don't thrive. In fact, for many, especially if it were a little infant, they would not survive. And that's where we begin to get into the idea of visiting those who are ill, Stephen's ministry, visiting those in prison. And you now have a user-friendly opportunity coming up. And in fact, after last night, it would appear, Lori, that your church is going to be our first group of community coming in on February 3rd at 1:30. Well, you got to get there beforehand because Getting into prison takes a while. But if we do it right, you'll be able to get back out again. So we want to make sure we do it right. I believe when Jesus walked this earth, that one of his first and foremost priorities was to teach us about forgiveness. I mean, when God decided to become physical, and boy, is this an abomination to the Muslims, and even to many Jews, it's so hard. God is so glorious and holy, he would never deign to touch we sinful people, his creation. And I've actually had Muslims and an imam in Washington State ask me, so why Jesus? We don't get it. And I said, I don't know about you, but I need a God I can see and touch and know, and who makes sense to me, and who understands my issues because he's walked in my shoes and lived in my body. And they looked at me and kind of wondered. You know, Muslims call us those who have added gods to God. And we wrestle with the mystery of that. But I believe Jesus' part of that after forgiveness is to make us one. Not uniform, but in unity. To make us one. And I believe that as he walked around, he shook people up pretty bad, because he would go to those who'd been kicked out, forced out, who were no longer part of community or family. He would go to the leper and say, may you be cleansed and healed. Yeah, you know the word for salvation, sozo. It means salvation. But the other half of the time, and maybe even more than that half, in Greek, it means healing. And he healed those lepers. He healed those tax collectors. He healed the prostitutes. And then welcomed them back to their community and to their family. Into unity. Into belonging. Much as what happened here with little Quinn. You know, she has a strong family, and that's beautiful to see. But now she has a much bigger family, and a family straight from Papa, from Abba, from God the Father. And I believe that Jesus' priority has been to welcome those who feel like, or who are treated like, they're not part of the family anymore, especially at Christmas or into the New Year. And he welcomed them back. He broke the barriers. He did the healing. He did what was necessary. Now, I always am still, it's been 6 months, when I see asp on people's shoulders and caps and backs, I think of Snake, you know, Cleopatra and the asp, and it still scares me. And sometimes I think it's a bit apt, because there are times that trying to start a church in the midst of that is like being in the midst of not the belly of a whale, but the belly of the snake, of the dragon. And you know, 20% of the people on that yard, and it's 930 right now, we're down a little bit, though it's still kind of crowded, are lifers. And in the chapel, about 50% of the people whom I deal with are lifers. They are not going to be able to leave, even with the blessing of Jesus, and go out into the community or back to their families. They have children that they're not able to be there for the baptism. They're going to leave there in a body bag. So how does Jesus bring them into community? Doesn't slow him down. He brings you, the community. He brings you, the family, there. And that's the powerful thing that we can do. Now, if you happen to think, oh good, because we are a mission field. I mean, we are every bit as productive a place to plant the seeds of the gospel as China or Guatemala or Africa. I have a volunteer from St. Mark and Marion who comes out with me. And we go inside the prison to the prison inside the prison. You see, in Living Unit D, we have kids under 18. We're the only one in the state. And those kids, by national federal law, cannot mingle with the adults incarcerated. And so they are completely separate from everything outside in the prison. They can't go out on the yard. I've had a couple fellows turn 18, And usually they go somewhere else. But this one fella was so excited he got to stay in this place that he'd been for a year and a half. And he got to go out on the yard and be with other people, be with adults. It was pretty amazing. But that's the basement. And then in second floor we have protective custody. And Thursdays in the afternoon at 4 o'clock, this other volunteer and I go. And like Paul, it's a cold call. We said, anybody here want to do anything with church or talk about God? And we have a congregation of 8. And we have baptized 2. One we knew about, and a Native American fellow who, after we celebrated the weather baptism, he said, can I be baptized too? Now, this fellow at St. Mark had spent 3 years studying to be a discipleship trainer. But he had never had, in a common congregation, somebody just step up and as an adult and say, I want to be baptized here and now. Kind of like that eunuch out in the trip. And he's just shocked and amazed. These guys are hungry. They are thirsty. They are yearning for family. They're yearning for something that will make sense beyond where they're at. Now, they're there for protective custody. This is to try to keep them alive in prison. Okay? And it's a rough place to be. And they're very, very diverse. I believe that Christ came to bring us together as family, to make us one. And what a beautiful way to do it. So we've worked through all the other things. Then we get to, in prison, you visited me. And they said, really? And it is fascinating to look. I've had a long and hard history with sexual offenders. My mother and wife were molested as children. One of our key in that 8 molested his own children. And I've been tempted in my life to see that as perhaps the most unforgivable sin. This guy is seeking God. He's seeking forgiveness. He's seeking some return to respect. He's on the bottom of the food chain in prison. Everybody there looks down on him, and he knows it. And when I said at our first kind of gathering, would you guys like to have communion or something like that? He said, in the 10 years I've been in prison, I've never had communion. They don't think, and I don't think, that I'm worthy of it. They treat me like an animal, and I feel like one. For him, we commune. We're kind of like old-fashioned. I was Missouri Synod for half my life. So we commune every other week. We'll move up to every week, but right now we got so many things to deal with that we're doing communion every other week. And this last Thursday I said, hey, you guys want communion next week? To a man, they almost stood up and said, yes. They're hungry. They're thirsty. And we're to reach out with them. If I could get Solomon to let me insert a time too, back in Ecclesiastes, I would say there's a time to be punished and a time to be set free. And that setting free needs to happen from the body. Words spoken from a human mouth. Hands shaking. Hands around shoulders. You are forgiven. These guys look at me like I'm crazy when I said, and it's here too, down in the Revelation passage. 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, it's finished. It's done. You are forgiven already and completely. Yeah, but if you knew the things that I've done. And I said, I have too. I too am a sinner. And while I'm in the flesh, I continue to sin. We have a fellow that was raised Southern Baptist, said it was crammed down his throat. He wanted nothing to do with it. I said, what are you doing here? He said, well, I'm still kind of open to hoping, We have Jehovah's Witness fella. He has some interesting thoughts. We have a Methodist fellow, a Presbyterian fellow. Well, they were before they came in. They'd done nothing for years. Have a Native American fellow this is all brand new to. And he's the one who stood up and said, will you baptize me too? I'm hearing good news, and I want to live that way. I want to change in my life. I want to be made new. And boy, he's the first one that shows up at the door, and it's quite exciting. I love the ecumenism. I love being there where in Washington State this could never have happened. In most of Iowa this couldn't happen. But Anamosa, for some reason, and I thank God for it, the inmates, the offenders, the prisoners, have been able to set up their own Bible studies. In the rest of the state and in all of Washington State, and probably most of the nation, inmates cannot do that without an outside volunteer coming in. So I come in, and there are 4 established little congregations, from the most reformed fundamentalist little group, Thy Word is Truth, to kind of the wildest one, Gate to Gate, from the gates of ASP to the gates of heaven. And they're delightful. In between is Humble King Ministry. They tend to be kind of T.D. Jakes folks. I love the whole family of God coming together. But I shared last night, I'll be Lutheran to the day I die, because Luther could deal with a paradox. Up until Luther, people would fight to the death about, are you a sinner or are you a saint? Make up your mind, which one are you? And Luther said, yes. My God that I understand is big enough to recognize us as sinners to the day we die, and be able to say at the same time, and you are saved. People killed each other over, is Jesus human or is Jesus divine? And Luther said, yes, fully human. And we celebrate his humanness from his birth in a manger to his death on a cross. When God decided to become human, he knew he was going to die. He knew that, and he was willing to do that with us and for us. And yet he is fully divine. Fully divine. I absolutely love what we're able to do. When I came there July 16th, I looked around. What are the needs here? I got to tell you, you folks in Iowa feed your prisoners better than happened in any of the 5 institutions in Washington that I've ever saw. I don't know if it's the corn and the pork and the beef and all, being mainly farmers, and you make sure people eat good. I put on 20 pounds since July. So in Maslow's thing, they're taken care of with the food. They just got new pillows. I was hearing on the radio and come, will LUV come get their pillows and things like that. And I talked to one of my chapel clerks, a lifer, a guy who, by the way, just had rotacuff surgery. And he told the doctor, he said, if you have students that need to learn, let them learn on me. I'm a lifer. Let them get their skills here. I know that you'll make sure they get it right eventually, but I want them to get to be, able to reach out. He's got that kind of spirit. And I said, hey, new pillows? I can sleep so much better. He said, it's just amazing. You don't think about these kind of things. But Iowa State, while you have a bumper sticker that kind of shocks and scares me in some ways, life in Iowa means life. You aren't going to get out. Now, God has other plans, and I've seen it happen, but that's kind of the ethos here. Life is life. And there are people. There's a 23-year-old young man from Ottumwa. Haven't been there yet, but I'm looking forward to it. His church visits him every week. And I understand Ottumwa is a pretty good drive. His family, or one of the members of his family, visits him every week. This is a young man who sees the rest of his life. Probably at Anamosa, he might move. I suspect he'll stay there. And he's building a life for himself. I really wanted him for a chapel clerk. He's just got the enthusiasm and the youth and got a great spirit. But he says, I want to keep working in the kitchen because when there's leftover cookie dough, I get to eat the cookie dough. He's building a life that he wants, that he likes. And I got to tell you, if you think that as a mission field in your backyard, we're going to bring God there. My first week, I had this scrawny, pimply face, just looked like a kid who probably had Asperger's syndrome, come up to me and say, Pastor Jerry, I want to tell you my story. Okay. He said, I was the lead Satanist here for the last 3 years. And since January of this year, that Gate-to-Gate Ministries, they come up to me and say they're praying for me. And I say, I don't want your prayers, I'm a Satanist. And they kept praying for him anyway. And then they started inviting him to come worship with them. Just come for a Bible study. And he said, I'm bored. I got nothing better to do. I was kind of curious. So I came. And instead of cramming the Bible down my throat, they said, hey, bring your Satanist Bible, Anton LaVey. I never really looked at one close. I have now. And they plopped that Satanist Bible down next to the New King James. And they started reading. And he said, Pastor Jerry, my Bible didn't make as much sense as your Bible. So I started listening. And he said, just being around people that love each other, yeah, it's the scary part, those Satanists. He said, when I got back to the special needs unit, which is a very hard place to be, it's where all the mental cases are, those who are emotionally disturbed. He said, people wanted to be around me. I've never had that in my whole life. And I thought, Matt, that's pretty good. So I asked him to baptize me. And since January, without an outside pastor, without an outside volunteer, these guys inside are studying their word and living their word. And I know more than, he said, I'll write it all down for you. And quite frankly, as a footnote, as an aside, if you'd grown up in life, treated the way this kid had, his mother tried to kill him. She did kill herself at 4 years old. And he's been in institutions ever since. Satan makes a whole lot of sense. And I've heard good Christians say, like after World War II, after what I've seen, how could there be a God? But boy, you can sure affirm there's a Satan and he's working overtime. This kid came to Christ. And he wrote it for me. I've got a PowerPoint slide if to see what he has gone through and where he has come. Not in a beautiful church like this, but in a cell and out on a yard in the special needs unit, the scariest place in the whole place. Christ is alive and at work. He dwells in his spirit in these men. And I invite you to come. Be sheepish. Come visit folks in prison. And you will be as blessed as they are. And you will find there's a part of the family, the black sheep of the family, that are very real and have wonderful, wonderful experiences and testimonies of God. And they will be so hungry and thirsty to see their community and their family that you will just be, they'll knock your socks off. You'll feel so welcome, so respected, and so appreciated. It's just amazing. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now we've talked about family and relationships. And the final and highest need is to be able to worship. If you're interested, please, today, fill out one of your little cards that gives all the information, your name, your phone number, your email address. Because January 18th at 9:30 in the morning and at 6 o'clock in the evening, I invite you, if you want to come more than just once, to come to our training. And you'll get to see the inside. And I'll bet with this many folks here, one of you or some of your family used to come play basketball, used to come play baseball with the guys there. And as with any other human kind of effort, people have messed it up for other ones, and we can't do that sort of thing now. But here's a new way. Come worship with them. That's the next need, to worship God. And for them to see that you're willing to sit next to them and worship with them. They really are forgiven. They really are part of the family of Christ. They are free indeed. There is a time to be punished, absolutely. And there is a time to be set free. I can't take some of those guys outside with me, but I have the opportunity, the blessing, and the delight to take some of you in with me to them, and they can know they are not alone. they are free indeed. May you too be free indeed. Amen? Amen.